Hello, and a most hearty welcome to the first Wednesday Musings from the Spirit of New Earth. I'm excited to do this weekly broadcast, and the theme, generally speaking, is going to be about honoring my former teachers and those that have influenced me along my spiritual pathway. I think it is now time to acknowledge the wisdom that was brought forth, the healing that was brought forth, that helped me along my spiritual path. So today, I'd like to talk about Grandma. That's my father's mother, who was born on Honshu, the big island in Japan. And she came to America, perhaps in the first wave of Japanese to come to California before the turn of the 20th century. And what I know about her background was she was an aristocrat who married a farmer, which is kind of a no-no, especially back in those days in Japan. Anyway, they came to America, and I'm not sure if they knew anybody. I'm not sure exactly the reason why they migrated, but they ended up in the Bay Area in California, where a lot of my relatives, aunts and uncles, cousins and nephews were born and raised. So what I can remember from our connection, and interestingly enough, she never spoke English and I never learned Japanese. So, well, she did speak a little pidgin English, just enough to communicate like it's time to eat breakfast. And what I remember mostly, since our communication had to be telepathic and intuitive, give you an example. Before breakfast, I would go over there on most Sundays with my brother to go to boring Methodist church Sunday school. I went from, I guess, when I was in elementary school up through maybe the beginning part of my high school days. And I remember she used to be a fabulous cook, a very, I don't know how to say it. She put a lot of love into her food, and her food always tasted delicious, especially her breakfast, and also her unusual lunch. But I remember her pancakes. They have been the most wonderful pancakes I've ever had. And I don't know her secret recipe, but boy, they sure were good. But anyway, she would stand over me. I'd be sitting in a chair and she would do a blessing on my head. And she did a little bit of pidgin English with her blessing. But she would basically say to Christ, because she followed Christ, the teachings of Yeshua ben Joseph, to protect me, for me to believe in Christ, and for me to be a success. So somewhere in her awareness, she probably tapped into this low self-esteem issue I had growing up. And having been also the object of racism, didn't help any. But I was born right after the war and got a lot of flack from strangers. But in any case, I recovered from that. But she used to do these blessings on my head, and I could feel the energies pouring into my crown. Interesting enough, I didn't find out much about her life until at her funeral. I was sitting next to one of my aunts, one of my dad's 5 sisters, and we're all in the were in the church, but not necessarily the Methodist church that she taught out of. So what my aunt told me, surprisingly, I never knew, right, until after she passed, that she was a spiritual leader of the Berkeley Free Methodist Church. And she had never talked about that at all. All she would say is she would get up at 4 o'clock every morning and pray for everybody. Well, I guess the congregation, being the leader of the church. But nobody ever told me she was the spiritual leader of the church. Odd, huh? So I'd like to share an experience with you from her funeral. So it was more or less a traditional funeral where the casket was there on a stage, and people one by one would come up from their pews and pay their respects. So I'm in line, and then I come up to her, and then I face her coffin. Actually, it was open, but I didn't look in. But I was facing the coffin, and then I closed my eyes, and I saw Grandma's spirit blessing everybody that came forward to pay the respects. And all of a sudden, this rush of energy came over me. It was in my body, it was all around me, and I began to shake. I literally began to physically shake. I saw her light, I saw the power of her blessings, and it was this incredibly, I would say a bit overwhelming, but in a very good way. So after I paid my respects, I walked back to where I was sitting in the pews, and I was still shaking. And I shook for about 20 minutes, if I remember correctly. And I'm looking around the church, and I thought, nobody's having this experience but me with Grandma, with her spirit. They're all weeping and sad and got their handkerchiefs out and blowing their nose and stuff. And I'm sitting there shaking, visibly shaking. Quite amazing. So that was maybe my first experience that there is no death upon departure from your body. It's a beautiful experience. But getting back to all those Sundays that I spent with Grandma, she was a server, and so she would serve me breakfast and this odd kind of lunch that was actually very tasty. And I'd either watch football games on TV, or I'd go take a nap on her couch. And actually, I did that more often than not. And I would have this deep sleep, this deep nap, where I would just go into the zone. I mean, I don't know. I was just totally gone. And, I napped for about 2 hours until my dad came by to pick us up to go back home. So those are my favorite times with Grandma. And I'll share with you, Grandma, she passed when she was 94. She had fallen in her kitchen, either hit her head or hit her hips, but it made her kind of bedridden. And she had a lot of energy. She lived alone for about 30 years after her husband passed away at a very young age of, I think, around 64. Actually, the year that's when I graduated, 1964, from high school. He passed that year. But I remember I was about ready to graduate from Sonoma State University in Santa Rosa, California, with my master's degree in education and my teaching credentials in early childhood. And I had taken some pictures, or I had a friend take some pictures of me working with the kids as part of my project, I guess, because I was working at a preschool, multicultural, low-income preschool. Loved it. And anyway, so I got those pictures from my friend, and I put it in an album. I wish I'd had that album. I don't know what happened to it, but it was of Kenji working with the little kids, the little 3 and 4-year-olds. And so I went to Grandma's house, drove down there by myself to Berkeley, California, and showed her the album. And I don't know if she started kind of weeping in joy, but I could tell that she was waiting not to go until I brought her the album and told her I was going to get my master's degree. And she was so very excited because I believe at that time only one cousin had a graduate degree, nobody else. And so I was probably the second one in the extended family that got a graduate degree. She was so thrilled and had a sense she was going to pass soon after my visit, and which she did. About within 2 months, I think, she passed. But she was waiting for me to be a success. That, in her eyes, getting a master's degree and credentials was success. So I didn't disappoint Grandma. So these stories about Grandma maybe will give you some reflection and some inspiration that all the hard work that you put in your life is going to pay off eventually at some point. Grandma does come to me on occasion, like when I used to teach at the retreats. She would come occasionally, kind of just check in, see how I was doing. My parents also did that. A little short story on them is they never believed up to their passing that I would be a success, that I would make something of myself and my life. And when they visited, they were very proud. They were like kind of sitting in the corner, like in a balcony kind of space, if you know what I mean. And they were looking down and as how I was working the room with the teachings and the healings, and they were very proud. In fact, one time when we were in Santa Fe, Mom kind of nudged Dad with her elbows saying, see, he did it. Because they never believed that I would amount to anything. So I hope that is some inspiration for you as well. That when they are on the other side, they see you more clearly. So I want to invite Grandma Spirit to come in just for a moment so that you can experience her essence. I know she is still working with the congregation in her own way, spreading the teachings and helping all those that were members of the church to move on and to heal. So let's just take a moment and call in her spirit. I always called her Grandma, but her first name was Ayaki. And I'd like to take this opportunity to again thank Grandma for all her love and support, her healing presence. I will say that Grandma is, up to this date, the most enlightened or aware, or how shall I say, dedicated servant of Christ that I have known in my life. Her energy was always so pure. Grandma never had anything negative to say about anybody. She was always very positive. Even in the last 30 years where she lived alone, this big Berkeley house, I don't know what her prayers were to all those that she loved and cared about, or prayers for herself. But Grandma was fairly healthy up until the time that she passed. And I remember her soft, healing hands. She had the smoothest, beautiful, delicate, healing hands that I've ever been touched by. Always remember that. The softness and the power of her hands. So you may, as we conclude this musings for this Wednesday, you may call upon her for healing. Call upon her presence. Tell her, Kenji referred. And as we conclude today, again, I wish to give much gratitude and thanks to Grandma for her caring for me all my life. And she is probably the most connected or how shall we say? I feel that Grandma knew me the most while she was here. She saw who I was or who I was to become, in spite of my early rebelliousness. She was very patient. So thank you, Grandma, for all the love and support, even today. So thank you, folks, for tuning in. Many blessings of hope and healing to you and family and all your loved ones. And as they say in Japan, sayonara.